Charles Morris steps off the transport ship onto New Terra Colony's bustling spaceport, his eyes immediately drawn to a commotion near the customs area. A striking alien female, her blue-tinged skin glistening under the harsh spaceport lights, gesticulates wildly at a group of stern-faced security officers. Her translator crackles and sputters, failing to convey her frantic pleas. The 35-year-old human engineer pauses, his luggage forgotten at his feet. He's here to start a new job maintaining the colony's atmospheric generators, but this unfolding drama captures his full attention. As he moves closer, he catches fragments of the alien's broken speech. Please, children, no return, death waiting. The security officers exchange skeptical glances. One of them, a gruff-looking man with a shock of gray hair, shakes his head. I'm sorry, ma'am, but without proper documentation, we can't verify your refugee status. We have no choice but to deport you back to Suliban space. Charles feels a jolt of alarm. Suliban space? He's heard rumors about the authoritarian regime ruling that sector. His mind races, piecing together the alien woman's situation. A refugee fleeing persecution, seeking asylum on New Terra, and now facing deportation back to a place where death awaits. He steps forward, drawn by an impulse he can't fully explain. Excuse me, he interjects, addressing both the alien and the officers. I couldn't help overhearing. Is there a problem? The Suliban woman turns to him, her large, luminous eyes filled with desperation. Please, help. I am Quinn. My children. She gestures to two small Suliban huddled behind her, their eyes wide with fear. The gray-haired officer sighs. Sir, this is a matter of colony security. This woman claims to be a political refugee, but her documentation is incomplete. We can't just let anyone in without proper vetting. Charles nods, his mind working quickly. I understand, officer, but I can vouch for Quinn and her children. We're old friends. I've been expecting them. The lie slips out easily, surprising even Charles himself. The officers exchange glances, clearly caught off guard by this unexpected development. Quinn stares at Charles, confusion mixing with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. She remains silent, perhaps sensing that this human stranger represents her last chance to stay on New Terra. The lead officer narrows his eyes. You know this woman, sir? Charles nods firmly, committing fully to his impulsive decision. Yes, I do. Her husband was a prominent Suliban dissident. He was... Charles pauses, choosing his words carefully. He was executed by their government. Quinn and the children fled to save their lives. A tense silence falls over the group. The officers confer quietly among themselves, while Quinn clutches her children close, her gaze never leaving Charles. Finally, the gray-haired officer turns back to them. All right, we'll allow a temporary stay while we review the case. But you, he points at Charles, are responsible for them during this time. Understand? Charles nods, relief washing over him. Absolutely. Thank you, officer. As they walk away from the customs area, the gravity of his actions begins to sink in. Charles has just vouched for an alien family he knows nothing about, potentially jeopardizing his own standing in the colony. Quinn walks beside him, her children trailing behind, their steps uncertain on this strange new world. Thank you, Quinn says softly, her translator finally cooperating. But why? You do not know us. Charles meets her gaze, seeing the mix of gratitude and wariness in her alien features. I couldn't stand by and do nothing, he replies simply. As they exit the spaceport into the artificial daylight of New Terra Colony, neither of them notices the discreet figures observing from the shadows. Human and Suliban intelligence agents make notes, their interest piqued by this unexpected development. The stage is set for a complex dance of trust, cultural barriers, and hidden agendas as Charles and Quinn navigate their new reality. As Charles and Quinn stepped out of the spaceport into the artificial daylight of New Terra Colony, the reality of their situation began to sink in. The bustling streets were a stark contrast to the sterile environment they had just left, filled with a diverse array of humans and aliens going about their daily lives. We need to find you a place to stay, Charles said, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. He noticed the curious glances from passers-by, some openly staring at Quinn's blue-tinged skin and alien features. A few faces twisted with barely concealed hostility, causing Charles to instinctively move closer to Quinn and her children. Quinn nodded, her translator crackling as she spoke. "Yes, thank you. We are grateful for your help." They made their way through the crowded streets, Charles leading them towards the lower-income district, where he knew temporary housing for refugees was available. As they walked, he couldn't help but notice the way Quinn's skin seemed to shimmer under the colony's artificial sunlight, her large eyes taking in every detail of her new surroundings. After navigating through a maze of narrow streets, they arrived at a nondescript building. Charles approached the front desk and spoke quietly with the attendant, explaining Quinn's situation. After a few minutes of back and forth, he returned to Quinn with a small keycard in hand. "It's not much," Charles said, apologetically, as he led them to a small, sparsely furnished apartment. "But it's safe, and it's yours while your case is being reviewed." Quinn's eyes welled with tears as she took in the modest accommodation. "It is more than we had hoped for," she said softly, her children clinging to her legs. Over the next few days, Charles found himself spending more and more time with Quinn and her family. He helped them navigate the complexities of human customs, introducing them to Earth cuisine, and assisting Quinn in enrolling her children in the colony's multicultural education program. One evening, as they sat in the small apartment, sharing a meal of synthesized protein cubes flavored to mimic Earth dishes, Charles found himself captivated by Quinn's resilience. "How are you adjusting?" he asked, watching as she carefully cut the food into small pieces for her children. Quinn paused, her large eyes meeting his. "It is challenging," she admitted, "but we are alive, and for that, I am grateful." Charles nodded, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He reached out, hesitating for a moment before placing his hand on hers. Quinn's skin felt cool and smooth beneath his touch, unlike anything he had experienced before. The moment was interrupted by the chime of Charles' communication device. He glanced at it, his face falling as he read the message. "Everything okay?" Quinn asked, concern evident in her voice. Charles sighed. "It's my supervisor at the atmospheric generators. I've been neglecting my duties. He wants to see me first thing tomorrow." The next morning, Charles found himself in the office of Marcus Holt, his stern-faced supervisor. The man's bushy eyebrows furrowed as he glared at Charles across the desk. "Morris, your performance has been unacceptable," Marcus growled. "Late arrivals, early departures, sloppy work. What's going on?" Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I've had some personal matters to attend to, sir." Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and threatening. "Let me be clear. Your job is on the line. Improve immediately or you're out. Understood?" Charles nodded, his mind racing. As he left the office, he felt torn between his growing feelings for Quinn and his professional responsibilities. Meanwhile, Quinn was facing her own challenges. Despite her best efforts, she struggled to find employment. Many potential employers turned her away as soon as they saw her alien features or learned of her refugee status. One evening, Charles returned to Quinn's apartment to find her sitting alone in the dark, her children already asleep. "Quinn?" he called softly, approaching her. "What's wrong?" She looked up at him, her luminous eyes filled with unshed tears. "I fear for our future here, Charles," she whispered. "How can I provide for my children if no one will give me a chance?" Charles sat beside her, instinctively pulling her close. Quinn stiffened for a moment before relaxing into his embrace, her cool skin pressed against his. "We'll figure it out," he murmured, stroking her arm gently. "I promise." As they sat there in the dim light, neither of them noticed the small device hidden in the corner of the room, its lens focused on their intimate moment. In a nondescript building across the colony, Garrett Thorne of the Interstellar Intelligence Agency watched the feed with growing interest. "Well, well," he muttered to himself, "what do we have here?" The peace of the moment was shattered by the sound of angry voices outside. Charles and Quinn rushed to the window to see a group of humans marching down the street, carrying signs with xenophobic slogans. "Aliens out! Earth for humans!" The chants grew louder as the crowd approached. At the head of the group, a charismatic man with a bullhorn rallied the protesters. New Terra is for humanity, he shouted. We won't let these alien infiltrators destroy our way of life. Charles felt a surge of anger. Without thinking, he stormed out of the apartment and into the street, confronting the leader of the protest. Who do you think you are? Charles demanded, his face inches from the man's. The leader, Victor Reeves, sneered. I'm the voice of true humans, friend. Victor Reeves, and you do well to join us instead of consorting with alien scum. Charles' fist connected with Reeves' jaw before he even realized what he was doing. The crowd erupted into chaos as Reeves stumbled backward, blood trickling from his split lip. Within moments, security officers descended on the scene. Charles found himself being roughly handcuffed and dragged away, the angry shouts of the protesters ringing in his ears. As he was shoved into the back of a security vehicle, Charles caught a glimpse of Quinn standing in the doorway of her apartment, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. The realization of what he had done hit him like a physical blow. He had jeopardized everything, his job, his freedom, and worst of all, Quinn's precarious situation on New Terra. The security vehicle sped away, leaving Quinn alone on the hostile streets, her future now more uncertain than ever. Ever. As the security vehicle disappeared around a corner, Quinn felt a wave of despair wash over her. She retreated into the apartment, her children huddling close, sensing their mother's distress. The next morning, Quinn woke to the harsh reality of her situation. With Charles in custody, she had lost her only ally on New Terra. The colony suddenly felt more alien and threatening than ever before. Desperate for help, Quinn remembered Charles mentioning his supervisor, Marcus Holt. It was a long shot, but she had no other options. After dropping her children off at school, she made her way to the atmospheric generators facility. The imposing structure loomed before her, its massive turbines humming with energy. Quinn approached the reception desk, her translator crackling as she spoke. I need to see Marcus Holt, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It's urgent. The receptionist eyed her suspiciously, but made the call. To Quinn's surprise, Marcus agreed to meet her at a nearby diner during his lunch break. An hour later, Quinn sat across from Marcus in a dimly lit booth. The diner buzzed with the chatter of human workers, many casting curious glances at the Suliban woman. Marcus studied Quinn with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. So, you're the reason Charles has been neglecting his duties, he said gruffly. Quinn took a deep breath. Mr. Holt, Charles is in trouble. He was arrested last night for defending me and my children against protesters. I have nowhere else to turn. Marcus's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He leaned back, his eyes distant. Years ago, I knew an alien woman. We were close, he said quietly. But the pressure from society, the looks, the whispers, it became too much. I let her go, and I've regretted it ever since. Quinn listened intently, hope flickering in her chest. Marcus sighed heavily. I'll see what I can do to help Charles, but you need to understand the gravity of your situation here on New Terra. It's not going to be easy. I understand, Quinn replied, gratitude evident in her voice. Thank you, Mr. Holt. As Marcus left the diner, Quinn felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. Perhaps all was not lost after all. Meanwhile, Charles sat in a holding cell, his mind racing. The events of the previous night played on repeat in his head. The angry faces of the protesters, the satisfying crunch as his fist connected with Reeves's jaw, the look of fear on Quinn's face as he was dragged away. His brooding was interrupted by the sound of his cell door opening. A stern-faced guard stood in the doorway. Morris, you've made bail, the guard announced. Confused but relieved, Charles followed the guard out of the detention center. As he stepped into the harsh, artificial sunlight of New Terra, a voice called out to him. Mr. Morris, a word please. Charles turned to see a man in a nondescript suit approaching. The man's eyes were sharp and calculating, his posture radiating authority. I'm Garrett Thorne, Interstellar Intelligence Agency, the man said, flashing a badge. We need to talk about your Suliban friend. Charles felt his heart rate quicken. Quinn? What about her? Thorne's eyes narrowed. We have reason to believe she might be more than just a refugee. Tell me, Mr. Morris, how well do you really know Quinn? She's not a spy, if that's what you're implying, Charles retorted, anger rising in his voice. Are you certain? Thorne pressed. The Suliban government has been known to use sleeper agents. How can you be sure she hasn't manipulated you? Charles opened his mouth to argue, but doubt crept into his mind. How much did he really know about Quinn's past? Before he could respond, his communication device chimed. It was a message from Marcus Holt, ordering him to report to work immediately. This conversation isn't over, Mr. Morris, Thorne said as Charles turned to leave. Be careful who you trust. Charles hurried to the atmospheric generators facility, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. As he entered the control room, he was struck by the chaos that greeted him. Alarms blared, technicians rushed back and forth, and the main display showed critical system failures across the board. Morris, Marcus barked, where the hell have you been? We're on the brink of a complete system collapse. Charles jumped into action, his fingers flying over the control panels as he assessed the damage. As he worked, he overheard two colleagues whispering nearby. I heard it was those anti-alien nutjobs, one said. They're planning to sabotage the whole system. Charles felt his blood run cold. If the atmospheric generators failed, the entire colony would be at risk. And Quinn... Without a second thought, Charles bolted from the control room, ignoring Marcus's shouts. He had to warn Quinn. As he raced through the streets of New Terra, Charles noticed the increased tension in the air. Humans and aliens alike moved with purpose, fear evident in their eyes. In the distance, he could hear the angry chants of protesters. Charles burst into Quinn's apartment, out of breath and frantic. Quinn! We have to... He stopped short. Quinn stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by packed bags. Her children clung to her sides, their eyes wide with fear. Charles, Quinn said, surprise and guilt warring on her face. I was going to tell you. Before Charles could respond, an ear-splitting alarm filled the air. Emergency lights bathed the room in an eerie red glow. A computerized voice echoed through the colony's communication system. Warning, atmospheric generators compromised. Oxygen levels critical. This is not a drill. All residents report to designated emergency shelters immediately. Charles and Quinn locked eyes, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Whatever doubts or arguments they had mere moments ago were instantly forgotten. We need to get to the control center, Charles said urgently. I think I know how we can fix this, but I'll need your help. Quinn nodded, her expression resolute. Lead the way. As they rushed out of the apartment, Quinn's children in tow, they were met with a scene of utter chaos. Panicked colonists flooded the streets, pushing and shoving in their desperation to reach the shelters. Charles grabbed Quinn's hand, pulling her through the crowd. They fought against the tide of people, making their way towards the atmospheric control center. As they approached the facility, they could see the massive generators sputtering and failing. Smoke billowed from several access panels, and the usual hum of machinery had been replaced by an ominous groaning. They pushed through the doors of the control center, finding themselves in a room filled with frantic technicians and malfunctioning equipment. Alarms blared from every direction, and the main display showed oxygen levels dropping at an alarming rate. Charles turned to Quinn, his face grim but determined. Are you ready? Quinn nodded, her alien features set with drive. Together, she said, squeezing his hand. As they moved towards the central control panel, neither of them noticed Garrett Thorne, watching from the shadows. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. Nor did they see Victor Reeves slip into the room, a look of triumph on his bruised face. The fate of New Terra hung in the balance as Charles and Quinn prepared to confront the sabotage that threatened not just their lives, but the entire colony's existence. The fate of New Terra hung in the balance as Charles and Quinn prepared to confront the sabotage that threatened not just their lives, but the entire colony's existence. They rushed to the central control panel, their hearts pounding in unison with the blaring alarms. The scene before them was one of utter chaos. Technicians scrambled frantically from station to station, their faces etched with panic. Emergency lights bathed the room in an eerie red glow, casting long shadows across the walls. The main display screen flickered ominously, showing a colony-wide map with critical systems failing one by one. Charles's eyes darted across the control panel, his mind racing to process the cascade of information. "The main atmospheric processor is down," he shouted over the din. "We've got less than 2 hours before oxygen levels become critical." Quinn leaned in, her luminous eyes scanning the intricate machinery. A spark of recognition flashed across her face. "Charles, look," she said, pointing to a section of the processor. "These systems, they're similar to those on my homeworld. I might be able to help." Without hesitation, they set to work. Charles's fingers flew over the controls, bypassing safety protocols and rerouting power. Quinn, her lithe Suliban body, allowing her to access tight spaces, crawled into the bowels of the machinery to make manual adjustments. As they worked, the true extent of the sabotage became clear. "This wasn't just one person," Charles muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This was coordinated, planned." Quinn emerged from a maintenance hatch, her skin glistening with sweat. "Who would do this?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. Before Charles could respond, a commotion at the entrance caught their attention. Victor Reeves stormed in, flanked by a group of angry colonists. His face was still bruised from Charles's punch, but his eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. "See?" Reeves shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at Quinn. "The aliens are behind this. They're trying to kill us all." The crowd behind him growled in agreement, their faces contorted with fear and rage. Charles stepped protectively in front of Quinn, his hands clenched into fists. "That's enough, Reeves," a stern voice cut through the tension. Garrett Thorne emerged from the shadows, his IIA badge glinting in the emergency lights. "This is a restricted area. Clear out now." Reeves hesitated, then backed away, shooting a venomous glare at Charles and Quinn. As the crowd dispersed, Thorne approached the pair, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I hope you know what you're doing, Morris," he said, his gaze lingering on Quinn. Charles opened his mouth to retort, but a sudden alarm interrupted him. The main display flashed red, showing oxygen levels dropping at an alarming rate. "We need to focus," Quinn said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Charles, I think I can reroute power from the non-essential systems to boost the remaining functional parts of the processor. But someone needs to manually override the system from the radiation chamber." Charles nodded grimly. "I'll do it," he said, already moving towards the sealed door. Quinn grabbed his arm, her cool fingers sending a shiver down his spine. "No, I should go. My physiology might offer more protection against the radiation." As they argued, Thorne stepped forward. "I'll do it," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "It's my job to protect this colony, even if it means—" He left the sentence unfinished, the implication hanging heavily in the air. Before anyone could respond, the door burst open. Quinn's eldest child stumbled in, eyes wide with fear. "Mom!" the child cried, rushing into Quinn's arms. The sight of the child seemed to galvanize them all. Thorne's face softened for a moment, then hardened with willpower. Without another word, he strode towards the radiation chamber. "Wait!" Charles called out. He locked eyes with Thorne, a moment of understanding passing between them. "Good luck." Thorne nodded curtly, then sealed himself in the chamber. Through the thick glass, they watched as he worked the controls, his movements becoming increasingly sluggish as the radiation took its toll. Charles and Quinn redoubled their efforts, racing against time to stabilize the systems. Quinn's child huddled in a corner, watching with wide, frightened eyes as the adults fought to save the colony. Minutes ticked by like hours. Sweat beaded on Charles's forehead as he input complex algorithms. Quinn's fingers blurred as she rewired circuitry, her alien dexterity pushed to its limits. Suddenly, a loud hum filled the air. The main display flickered, then steadied. Oxygen levels, which had been plummeting, began to rise. "We did it," Charles breathed, hardly daring to believe it. Quinn sagged against him, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Thorne," she murmured, turning towards the radiation chamber. They rushed to the chamber, finding Thorne collapsed on the floor. His skin was pale and clammy, his breathing shallow. As they carefully extracted him, medical personnel swarmed in, whisking him away for treatment. In the aftermath, as the immediate crisis subsided, Charles and Quinn found themselves standing side by side, watching as the colony slowly returned to normal. The twin suns of New Terra peeked over the horizon, bathing everything in a soft golden light. "What happens now?" Quinn asked softly, her hand finding Charles. Charles squeezed her hand gently, his mind already racing with the implications of what they'd just been through. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As they stood there watching the new day dawn, neither of them noticed Marcus Holt observing them from across the room, a thoughtful expression on his face. Nor did they see Garrett Thorne, bandaged but conscious, being wheeled out of the medical bay, his eyes fixed on the unlikely pair with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. The immediate danger had passed, but as the colony stirred to life around them, it was clear that the events of the night had set in motion changes that would reshape the future of New Terra in ways none of them could yet imagine. The colony stirred to life as the first rays of sunlight pierced the dome, casting long shadows across the streets of New Terra. Charles and Quinn stood side by side, watching as emergency crews began the arduous task of repairing the damage caused by the sabotage attempt. The immediate danger had passed, but the aftermath of the crisis would reshape their world in ways they could not yet imagine. In the days that followed, news of Charles and Quinn's heroic efforts spread like wildfire through the colony. Colonists who had once eyed Quinn with suspicion now greeted her with warm smiles and words of gratitude. Charles found himself fielding questions about his alien friend from curious humans, eager to learn more about their Suliban neighbors. As they walked through the bustling marketplace one afternoon, Quinn noticed the change in atmosphere. "It's different now," she said softly, her luminous eyes taking in the scene around them. "People aren't avoiding me anymore." Charles nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "They're starting to see what I've known all along, that we're not so different after all." Their newfound celebrity status brought unexpected opportunities. Marcus Holt, the colony's administrator, approached them one evening as they left the atmospheric control center. "Morris, Quinn," he called out, his usually stern face softened by a hint of respect. "I need to speak with you both." In his office, Marcus laid out his proposal. "We're establishing an interspecies relations committee," he explained, his fingers steepled on his desk. "And we want you two to be key members." Charles and Quinn exchanged surprised glances. "Us?" Charles asked, taken aback. Marcus nodded. "Your actions during the crisis showed everyone what can be achieved when humans and aliens work together. We need that spirit to rebuild trust in our community." As they left Marcus's office, the weight of their new responsibility settled on their shoulders. Quinn reached out, her cool fingers intertwining with Charles's. "Together?" she asked, echoing their words from that fateful night. Charles squeezed her hand gently. "Together," he affirmed. Over the next few weeks, Charles and Quinn threw themselves into their new roles. They organized cultural exchange programs, mediated disputes between species, and worked tirelessly to promote understanding. Their days were filled with meetings and planning sessions, often stretching late into the night. One evening, as they pored over plans for an upcoming alien cuisine festival, Charles noticed Quinn's eldest child watching them from the doorway of her apartment. "Hey there," Charles said, offering a warm smile. "Want to join us?" The child hesitated for a moment before padding over to the table. Quinn pulled her child close, explaining their work in simple terms. As Charles watched them together, he felt a warmth spread through his chest. Without realizing it, he had become a part of their family. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed by the colony. Whispers and knowing glances followed them as they walked through the streets together. Some approved, seeing their relationship as a symbol of the new era of cooperation. Others, like the remnants of Victor Reeves's human supremacist group, viewed it with disgust. One afternoon, as they left a meeting with Suliban community leaders, Charles overheard a group of humans muttering angrily. "Alien lover!" one spat, glaring at Charles. Before Charles could respond, Quinn placed a calming hand on his arm. "Let it go," she murmured. "They're not worth it." Charles nodded, but the encounter left him unsettled. Despite the progress they'd made, pockets of resistance remained. As the colony's annual Unity Festival approached, Charles and Quinn found themselves at the center of the preparations. The event would be a celebration of New Terra's diverse population, featuring cultural displays from various species. "We should use this opportunity," Quinn suggested as they brainstormed ideas, "to show everyone that interspecies relationships can work." Charles felt his heart skip a beat. "Are you saying we should go public with our relationship?" Quinn's skin flushed a deeper shade of blue. "Is that what this is? A relationship?" Charles reached out, cupping her face gently. "I'd like it to be," he said softly. Their moment was interrupted by a commotion outside. They rushed to the window to see a sleek spacecraft touching down in the colony's main square. As the hatch opened, a regal Suliban woman emerged, her bearing unmistakably diplomatic. Quinn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Zara," she whispered. "Who?" Charles asked, confusion etched on his face. "My former sister-in-law," Quinn explained, her voice tight with emotion. "A high-ranking diplomat from our homeworld." As they watched Zara stride purposefully towards the administrative building, Charles felt a sudden chill. Something told him that Zara's arrival would change everything. Quinn turned to him, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. "Charles," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would she be here?" Before Charles could respond, a colony-wide announcement crackled through the speakers. Marcus Holt's voice, tinged with excitement, filled the air. "Attention all residents of New Terra. We have received word of a monumental change on the Suliban homeworld. All Suliban refugees are requested to report to the main square immediately for an important announcement." Charles and Quinn locked eyes, the weight of the moment hanging between them. Without a word, they hurried out of the apartment, Quinn's children trailing behind them. As they made their way through the crowded streets, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that their world was about to be turned upside down once again. The main square was a sea of faces, human and alien alike, all turned expectantly towards the makeshift stage where Zara now stood. Her eyes scanned the crowd, finally landing on Quinn. A flicker of recognition passed between them. As Zara began to speak, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering, Charles felt Quinn's hand tighten in his. He listened intently, his heart sinking with each word. The Suliban government had fallen. Quinn's people were free, and now they were being called home. Charles turned to Quinn, searching her face for a reaction. Her expression was unreadable, a storm of emotions raging behind her luminous eyes. As the crowd around them erupted into a cacophony of voices, Charles realized that the future they had begun to imagine together now hung in the balance. The Unity Festival stage loomed before them, a stark reminder of the choice that lay ahead. As Quinn's children clung to her, their faces a mix of excitement and uncertainty, Charles felt a knot forming in his stomach. He knew that the words they were about to speak would not only set the tone for the festival, but potentially determine the course of their lives. Taking a deep breath, Charles stepped onto the stage, Quinn at his side. The assembled colonists fell silent, their faces turned expectantly towards the unlikely pair. As Charles opened his mouth to speak, he caught Quinn's eye. In that moment, with the weight of two worlds on their shoulders, they knew that whatever came next, it would change everything. Everything for both of them. Charles cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the sea of faces before him. Humans and aliens alike stood shoulder to shoulder, their attention fixed on the unlikely pair on stage. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could utter a word, Quinn stepped forward. "My fellow colonists," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I stand before you today, not just as a Suliban, but as a resident of New Terra." She paused, her luminous eyes finding Charles's. "Recent events have brought change to my homeworld, offering the chance to return. But I've realized that home isn't always where you're from. Sometimes it's where you choose to be." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Charles felt his heart race, sensing the weight of Quinn's words. "I've decided to stay on New Terra," Quinn announced, her voice filled with emotion. "This colony, with all its challenges and triumphs, has become my home. And the connections I've made here," she turned to Charles, her skin flushing a deeper shade of blue, "they're too precious to leave behind." Charles stared at Quinn, momentarily stunned by her declaration. The crowd's reaction faded into background noise as he gazed into her eyes, seeing the future they'd only dared to imagine. In that instant, he knew what he had to do. Stepping forward, Charles took Quinn's hand in his. "Quinn," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed square, "you've shown me what it truly means to bridge worlds, to see beyond our differences and find the common threads that bind us all." He dropped to one knee, eliciting gasps from the audience. "Will you marry me?" The square erupted in a cacophony of cheers and exclamations. Quinn's eyes widened, her free hand flying to her mouth in surprise. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she stood frozen. Then slowly, a smile spread across her face. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." As Charles rose and embraced Quinn, the crowd's cheers reached a fever pitch. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for the colony's news feeds. In the sea of faces, Charles caught glimpses of varied reactions: joy, shock, and in some cases, barely concealed disgust. Marcus Holt pushed through the crowd, his face a mixture of surprise and calculation. "Congratulations," he said, shaking Charles' hand vigorously. "This is unexpected, but potentially very beneficial for our community relations. We must discuss how to proceed." Before Charles could respond, a tall, regal Sulaban woman approached. Zara, Quinn's former sister-in-law, regarded the couple with a cool, assessing gaze. "Quinn," she said, her tone carefully neutral, "I must speak with you. Privately." As Quinn moved to follow Zara, Charles felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Garrett Thorne, his expression grave. "We need to talk," Thorne said quietly. "Security concerns. My office as soon as possible." The jubilant atmosphere of the square began to fade as Charles realized the complexity of what he and Quinn had just set in motion. His eyes found Quinn's across the crowd, and he saw his own mix of elation and apprehension reflected in her gaze. In the days that followed, New Terra buzzed with news of the engagement. Charles and Quinn found themselves at the center of a media storm, their faces plastered across news feeds and public displays. The colony's administration, eager to capitalize on the goodwill, announced plans for a grand wedding ceremony. "It's a perfect opportunity," Marcus explained during a hastily arranged meeting. "A symbol of unity between species. We'll spare no expense." As the initial excitement settled, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Charles and Quinn sat in their apartment, surrounded by a mountain of wedding planning materials and cultural briefings. "I never realized how different our customs were," Charles murmured, flipping through a guide on Sulaban marriage rituals. Quinn nodded, her brow furrowed as she studied a human biology text. "There's so much to consider. Our diets, our sleep cycles, even our physical compatibility." A knock at the door interrupted their studies. Quinn's eldest child entered, eyes shining with excitement. "Can I help plan the wedding?" the child asked eagerly. As Quinn embraced her child, Charles noticed her younger offspring lingering in the doorway, face clouded with uncertainty. The complexities of their new family dynamic were becoming increasingly apparent. Later that week, Charles and Quinn found themselves in a sterile laboratory, surrounded by curious scientists and medical professionals. "We'll need to run a series of tests," the lead researcher explained, gesturing to an array of intimidating equipment, "to ensure long-term health compatibility and explore reproductive possibilities." Charles felt Quinn's hand tighten in his as they exchanged a nervous glance. The path ahead was uncharted territory, filled with challenges they were only beginning to understand. As they left the lab, Charles's communicator buzzed with an urgent message from Thorne. "Security briefing, now!" In Thorne's office, they were greeted by grim faces and a holographic display of the colony's layout. "We've intercepted chatter," Thorne began without preamble. "Remnants of Reeves's group. They're planning something big, possibly targeting the wedding." Charles felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at Quinn. The joy of their engagement was quickly being overshadowed by the harsh realities of life on New Terra. "What do we do?" Quinn asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Thorne's expression hardened. "We prepare, and we stay vigilant." As they left the office, Charles and Quinn found themselves face to face with Zara, her elegant features set in a mask of concern. "We need to talk," she said, her eyes fixed on Quinn. "About the consequences of your decision, for all of us." Charles squeezed Quinn's hand, sensing the storm gathering around them. Their engagement had set in motion events that would reshape not just their lives, but the future of human-alien relations on New Terra. As they followed Zara to a private meeting room, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. Still lay ahead. As the day of their wedding dawned, New Terra Colony buzzed with an electric mix of excitement and tension. Charles woke early, his stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation. He gazed out the window at the twin suns rising over the colony's skyline, casting a warm glow on the bustling streets below. The venue, a repurposed hangar at the edge of the settlement, had been transformed into a breathtaking fusion of human and Suliban aesthetics. Iridescent banners hung alongside traditional white streamers, while exotic flora from both worlds adorned every surface. Charles stood before a mirror, fumbling with the intricate fastenings of his custom-designed suit. The garment, a marvel of engineering in its own right, incorporated elements of Suliban formal wear while maintaining a distinctly human silhouette. "Need a hand?" Garrett Thorne's voice came from the doorway. The security chief's expression was a mix of amusement and concern as he helped Charles with the final adjustments. "Thanks," Charles said, taking a deep breath. "Everything's secure out there?" Thorne nodded, his eyes scanning the room out of habit. "As secure as we can make it. But Charles, you should know." A knock at the door interrupted him. Marcus Holt entered, his face alight with excitement. "It's time," he announced, "and wait until you see the turnout. Delegates from across the galaxy." As Charles made his way to the altar, he was struck by the sheer diversity of the assembled guests. Humans sat alongside a kaleidoscope of alien species, their differences momentarily set aside in celebration of this unprecedented union. The music shifted, a haunting melody that blended Earth and Suliban compositions. The audience turned as one, and Charles felt his breath catch in his throat. Quinn stood at the entrance, her iridescent skin shimmering beneath a gown that seemed to capture the essence of both their worlds. As Quinn glided down the aisle, Charles noticed the range of emotions playing across the faces in the crowd. Joy, curiosity, and in some cases, barely concealed disapproval. He caught sight of Zara, her expression unreadable as she watched her former sister-in-law approach. The ceremony began, a carefully choreographed dance of two cultures. Charles stumbled over the complex Suliban phrases in his vows, earning gentle laughter from the audience and a reassuring smile from Quinn. As they exchanged rings, his a band of earth metal, hers a delicate circlet that complemented her natural luminescence, Charles felt a surge of hope for their future. The officiant raised his hands, about to declare them married, when a deafening explosion rocked the hangar. Smoke filled the air as armed figures in mass stormed through the breach, firing indiscriminately into the crowd. "Everybody down!" Thorne's voice cut through the chaos as he and his security team sprang into action. Charles instinctively pulled Quinn close, shielding her with his body as they dropped to the floor. His mind raced, assessing the situation with the cool logic of an engineer. The decorative archway above them, he realized, could serve as a temporary barrier. "Quinn!" he shouted over the din. "Help me with this!" Together, they toppled the heavy structure, creating a makeshift barricade. As Thorne and his team engaged the attackers, Charles noticed the sound system's control panel nearby. With quick, precise movements, he reconfigured the speakers, creating a disorienting wall of sound that disoriented several of the assailants. Quinn's skin pulsed with intensifying light, a Suliban stress response that now served a crucial purpose. "This way!" she called out, guiding panicked guests towards the exits, her bioluminescence cutting through the smoke-filled air. The battle raged on, but something extraordinary was happening. Humans and aliens, moments ago mere wedding guests, now worked in seamless concert to overcome the threat. A Zentathi delegate used its multiple limbs to subdue an attacker, while a group of Paxan diplomats combined their empathic abilities to calm the panicked crowd. As the last of the extremists was subdued, an eerie quiet fell over the hangar. Charles found Quinn amidst the debris, her once pristine gown now torn and smudged. They embraced, both trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. "Are you okay?" Charles asked, his voice hoarse from the smoke. Quinn nodded, her luminescence still pulsing erratically. "I'm fine, but Charles, I can't seem to control my—" "It's okay," he assured her, even as he noticed the heat radiating from her skin. "We're okay." As the smoke cleared and the injured were tended to, Marcus Holt approached the couple, his suit disheveled, but his eyes bright with an almost manic energy. "We need to finish the ceremony," he insisted, "now more than ever." Charles and Quinn exchanged a look, understanding the weight of the moment. With the guests reassembled, many still bearing the marks of the recent battle, they retook their places at the altar. The officiant, his voice slightly shaken but resolute, concluded the ceremony. As Charles and Quinn sealed their union with a kiss, a cheer erupted from the crowd, no longer just witnesses but now participants in a moment of defiant unity. As the newlyweds made their way down the aisle, Charles noticed Quinn's increasing discomfort. Her skin was glowing with an intensity he'd never seen before, and she flinched at his touch. "Quinn, what's wrong?" he asked as they reached the relative privacy of their preparation room. "I don't know," she said, her voice strained. "It's like my body is overreacting to everything. Charles, I'm afraid I might hurt you if we—" A gentle knock interrupted them. Dr. Ilara Tassoni, the colony's xenobiologist, entered with a concerned expression. "I thought this might happen," she said, quickly assessing Quinn's condition. "It's a rare Suliban response to extreme stress. We need to stabilize her before you can complete the marriage." As Dr. Tassoni began her examination, Charles's communicator buzzed. It was Thorne requesting his presence for an urgent security briefing. He looked at Quinn, torn between his new responsibilities as a husband and the pressing needs of the colony. Quinn managed a weak smile. "Go," she said. "I'll be fine with Dr. Tassoni. We have a lifetime ahead of us to figure this out." Charles kissed her forehead gently, careful to avoid her overheated skin, and headed for the door. As he left, he heard Dr. Tassoni mention something about a specialized protective suit, but the details were lost as he stepped into the corridor, where Thorne waited with a grim expression. "We need to talk," Thorne said, leading Charles away. This attack was just the beginning. As they walked, Charles caught sight of Quinn's children being comforted by a colony social worker. The older child's face was streaked with tears, while the younger one stared blankly ahead, clearly in shock. Charles realized that their wedding day, meant to be a symbol of unity and hope, had become something far more complex. As he followed Thorne, his mind raced with the challenges that lay ahead. Challenges that would test not only his marriage, but the very fabric of interspecies relations across the galaxy. The wedding attack had shattered any illusions of easy acceptance for their union. In the weeks that followed, Charles and Quinn found themselves facing a challenge they hadn't anticipated. Quinn's heightened bioluminescence, triggered by the stress of the attack, persisted long after the danger had passed. Her skin radiated an intense pulsating light that made physical contact painful for Charles. Dr. Ilara Tassoni, the colony's xenobiologist, worked tirelessly to find a solution. Her lab became a second home for the newlyweds as she ran countless tests and simulations. "I think we've got it," Dr. Tassoni announced one evening, holding up a sleek silvery garment. "A specialized protective suit for Charles. It should allow you to, consummate your marriage safely." Charles examined the suit with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "It looks like something out of a sci-fi holovid," he remarked, running his hand over the smooth material. Quinn's skin flickered with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "Will it really work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Tassoni nodded confidently. "The suit is designed to neutralize the effects of Quinn's bioluminescence while maintaining tactile sensitivity. It's our best shot at allowing you two to connect." That night, in the privacy of their quarters, Charles and Quinn prepared to test the suit. Charles felt a flutter of nerves as he zipped up the form-fitting garment, acutely aware of the significance of this moment. Quinn approached him hesitantly, her skin pulsing with a soft, ethereal light. "Are you ready?" she asked, reaching out to touch his arm. Charles nodded, holding his breath as Quinn's fingers made contact with the suit. To his relief and amazement, he felt the warmth of her touch without any discomfort. Their eyes met, a spark of hope igniting between them. Slowly, carefully, they began to explore this new way of being together. As they embraced, the room filled with the gentle glow of Quinn's bioluminescence, no longer a barrier, but a beautiful accompaniment to their intimacy. The success of their first mating experience marked a significant milestone, not just for their relationship, but for interspecies medical research. Dr. Tisoni could barely contain her excitement when they reported back to her. "This is groundbreaking," she exclaimed, furiously taking notes. "The implications for other interspecies couples are enormous. We'll need to conduct further studies, of course. Would you be willing to participate in ongoing research?" Charles and Quinn exchanged a look, silently communicating their thoughts. After a moment, Quinn spoke for both of them. "If our experiences can help others, we're willing to do whatever it takes." As news of their successful union spread, Charles and Quinn found themselves at the center of intense scientific interest. The colonial administration, recognizing the potential impact of their case, established a dedicated research facility to study the long-term effects of human-Suliban coupling. The Interspecies Relations Committee, emboldened by this breakthrough, expanded its influence. Charles and Quinn were approached to spearhead a new initiative, the creation of mixed-species housing communities. "We believe this could foster better understanding and cooperation among different alien races and humans," Marcus Holt explained during a meeting. "Your experience makes you the perfect ambassadors for this project." The initiative faced initial resistance from both human and alien conservatives. Protests erupted outside the Colonial Administration building, with signs declaring, "Keep bloodlines pure" and "Protect our heritage." Despite the opposition, Charles and Quinn threw themselves into the project. They spent long hours designing living spaces that could accommodate the diverse needs of various species, consulting with architects, engineers, and xenobiologists to create truly inclusive environments. As the first mixed-species housing complex neared completion, early adopters began to move in. The positive reports from these pioneers gradually began to shift public opinion. Humans and aliens who had never interacted beyond formal settings found themselves sharing common areas, learning about each other's cultures, and forming friendships. Amidst their public duties, Charles and Quinn struggled with private challenges. Quinn's children, still adjusting to their new family dynamic, showed signs of stress. The older child threw themselves into their studies, excelling in the colony's school and becoming an unofficial ambassador for interspecies understanding among their peers. The younger child, however, withdrew further. Their behavior at school became increasingly disruptive, leading to concerned calls from teachers. Charles and Quinn, recognizing the need for specialized help, sought out a xenochild psychologist. Dr. Venna, a Zentathi with multiple arms and a soothing voice, met with the family regularly. "Your younger child is struggling with a sense of loss," she explained during one session. "The changes in your family structure have been particularly difficult for them to process." Charles felt a pang of guilt. Between his work on the atmospheric generators, the housing initiative, and the ongoing medical studies, he realized he hadn't been as present for the children as he should have been. "What can we do?" Quinn asked, her skin pulsing with concern. Dr. Venna outlined a series of strategies, emphasizing the need for stability and individual attention. "It's crucial that you both make time to connect with each child separately," she advised. "They need to feel secure in their place within this new family unit." As they left Dr. Venna's office, Charles's communicator buzzed with an urgent message from Garrett Thorne. The attack on their wedding had prompted a galaxy-wide security review, and Thorne had been promoted to head a new interspecies security task force. "We need to implement new security measures," Thorne's message read. "Can you come to the command center?" Charles looked at Quinn, torn between his various responsibilities. She nodded understanding, her skin flickering with a mix of emotions. "Go?" she said softly. "I'll start working on Dr. Venna's suggestions with the children." As Charles headed towards the command center, he couldn't shake the feeling that balancing his personal life, his work, and the broader implications of their interspecies union would be an ongoing challenge. The success of their physical intimacy had opened new doors, but it had also ushered in a host of new complications. The path ahead was unclear, but Charles was determined to navigate it for the sake of his family and the future of interspecies. Relations on New Terra. Charles's meeting with Thorne was abruptly interrupted by a blaring alarm that echoed through the command center. Red lights flashed, casting an eerie glow over the concerned faces of the staff. "What's happening?" Charles demanded, his heart racing. Thorne's expression darkened as he pulled up a holographic display. "Massive solar flare incoming. Our atmospheric shields aren't prepared for this level of radiation." Charles's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. The entire colony was at risk. His mind raced through calculations and possibilities, weighing the potential consequences of inaction against the personal cost of what he knew he had to do. "I need to get to the atmospheric control center," he said, his voice tight with tension. "We might be able to reinforce the shields, but it'll take everything we've got." Thorne nodded grimly. "Go. I'll coordinate evacuation procedures in case we can't hold." As Charles sprinted towards the exit, his communicator buzzed. It was Dr. Tisoni. "Charles, it's Quinn. Her condition is deteriorating rapidly. The stress of the crisis seems to have triggered premature labor. We need you here now." Charles froze, torn between his duty to the colony and his love for Quinn. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical force. With a heavy heart, he made his choice. "I can't, Doctor. The colony's shields are failing. If I don't fix them, we'll all be exposed to lethal levels of radiation. Please do everything you can for Quinn. I'll be there as soon as I can." Without waiting for a response, Charles cut the communication and ran towards the atmospheric control center. Each step felt like a betrayal, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. The control center was a hive of frantic activity when Charles arrived. Engineers and technicians scrambled to reinforce the shields, but their efforts were clearly insufficient. "Status report," Charles barked as he entered. Chief Engineer Lena Reeves looked up from her console, her face pale with worry. "The shields are at 40% capacity and dropping. We've got maybe an hour before they fail completely." Charles immediately took charge, his mind already formulating a plan. "We need to redirect power from non-essential systems, shut down everything that isn't life support or shield-related." As the team worked feverishly to implement Charles's emergency protocol, he couldn't help but think of Quinn. Was she okay? Had the baby been born? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside, focusing all his energy on saving the colony. Minutes stretched into hours as Charles and his team fought against time. They rerouted power grids, bypassed safety protocols, and pushed the colony's systems to their absolute limits. Charles's hands flew over the controls, his engineering expertise allowing him to find solutions where others saw only dead ends. Just as the shields reached critical levels, Charles's final play paid off. The reinforced shields flared to life, their strength bolstered by the redirected power. The colony trembled as the solar flare struck, but the shields held. A cheer went up from the exhausted team, but Charles felt no joy. As soon as he confirmed the danger had passed, he sprinted towards the medical facility, his heart pounding with fear and anticipation. He burst into the medical wing to find it in darkness, emergency lights casting long shadows. The silence was broken only by the steady beep of medical equipment running on backup power. "Dr. Tisoni?" Charles called out, his voice echoing in the dim corridor. The doctor emerged from a nearby room, her face etched with fatigue. "Charles, thank goodness you're here. The power outage complicated things, but we managed. Quinn gave birth to a healthy baby girl." Relief washed over Charles, but it was short-lived as he noticed the doctor's grim expression. "What's wrong? Where's Quinn?" Dr. Tisoni led him into the room she had just left. There, surrounded by softly beeping machines, lay Quinn. Her skin, usually luminescent, was pale and lifeless. "The strain of the premature labor was too much," Dr. Tisoni explained softly. "She fell into a coma immediately after the delivery. We're doing everything we can, but, Charles, I have to be honest, we don't know if she'll wake up." Charles stumbled to Quinn's bedside, his legs suddenly weak. He took her hand, feeling the unnatural coolness of her skin. "Quinn," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm here. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." A soft cry drew his attention to a small incubator next to Quinn's bed. Inside lay a tiny figure, her skin a soft blend of human pink and Suliban bioluminescence. Charles approached cautiously, overwhelmed by the sight of his newborn daughter. As he gazed at the miracle before him, the full weight of his new reality settled on Charles's shoulders. He was now responsible for this fragile new life, as well as Quinn's other children, all while his wife fought for her life. The colony looked to him as a key figure in their infrastructure and a symbol of interspecies unity. And somewhere out there, dark forces plotted against his family. Charles gently lifted his daughter from the incubator, cradling her close to his chest. He turned to face Quinn's unconscious form, his willpower hardening. "I don't know if you can hear me, Quinn," he said softly, "but I promise you this. I will protect our family. I will find a way to bring you back to us. And no matter what challenges we face, we'll face them together." As if in response, the baby stirred in his arms, her tiny hand reaching out to grasp his finger. In that moment, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, Charles felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever the future held, he would face it head-on for the sake of his family and the dream of unity they represented. Charles stood there, holding Aurora close, his emotions a tumultuous mix of joy and anxiety. The tiny hybrid child in his arms represented both a miracle and a daunting responsibility. He gazed at Quinn's still form, willing her to open her eyes, to share in this moment. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Quinn remained in her comatose state, her condition stable but unchanging. Charles adapted to his new reality as a single father, caring not only for Aurora but also for Quinn's 2 Suliban children. He established a routine, balancing his time between the medical facility, their home, and his work on the colony's atmospheric systems. Aurora's growth brought new challenges. Her hybrid nature manifested in unpredictable physical changes, alternating between human and Suliban traits. One day her skin would glow with bioluminescence. The next, it would take on a more human pallor. Charles often found himself at a loss, relying heavily on Dr. Tisoni's expertise. "Her cellular structure is unlike anything we've seen before," Dr. Tisoni explained during one of their regular checkups. She pointed to a holographic display of Aurora's DNA. "Look here, her regenerative capabilities are off the charts." Charles leaned in, fascinated despite his exhaustion. "What does that mean for her development?" "It means she could potentially heal from injuries at an accelerated rate," Dr. Tisoni said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "But more importantly, it could revolutionize medical treatments across species." The implications of this discovery sent ripples through the scientific community. Researchers from across the galaxy clamored for access to Aurora's genetic data. Charles found himself fielding requests from institutions he'd never heard of, each promising breakthrough treatments in exchange for samples. The colonial administration, recognizing the unprecedented nature of the situation, implemented a special support program for Charles and his family. A team of specialists was assigned to assist with Aurora's upbringing and the care of Quinn's other children. Xenobiologist Dr. Zara Vex became a regular presence in their home, monitoring Aurora's physical development. "Her ability to shift between human and Suliban traits is remarkable," she noted one afternoon, watching as Aurora's skin rippled with bioluminescence. "It's as if her body is constantly adapting to her environment." Child psychologist Dr. Nevin Rask worked closely with Quinn's older children, helping them process their mother's condition and the changes in their family dynamic. "They're resilient," he assured Charles after a particularly difficult session, "but they need stability and reassurance." As Aurora grew, her unique appearance and abilities fascinated both humans and aliens alike. She became a symbol of hope and unity for the colony, her very existence challenging long-held prejudices about interspecies relationships. However, this attention also brought risks. Garrett Thorne called Charles to the security center one evening, his face grim. "We've uncovered a plot," he said without preamble, pulling up a series of encrypted communications. "A corporation called Genix Industries is planning to abduct Aurora for genetic research." Charles felt his blood run cold. "What are we going to do?" Thorne's expression hardened. "We're implementing new security measures, biometric scanners, force fields, the works. No one gets near your family without clearance." The constant threat burdened immensely on Charles. He found himself jumping at shadows, questioning the motives of everyone who showed interest in Aurora. Sleep became elusive, plagued by nightmares of losing his daughter or Quinn never waking up. The colony's leadership, concerned about Charles's mental health, assigned him a personal AI assistant. The AI, which Charles nicknamed Max, helped manage his duties and monitored his well-being. "Your cortisol levels are elevated, Charles," Max would remind him gently. "Perhaps a brief meditation session before your next meeting?" 6 months after Aurora's birth, Dr. Tisoni called Charles to the medical facility, her voice thrumming with excitement. "We've had a breakthrough," she said, leading him to Quinn's room. "We've developed an experimental procedure using Aurora's stem cells combined with modified nanobots. We believe it could repair Quinn's neural pathways." Charles stared at the complex diagrams on the doctor's tablet, hope and fear warring within him. "What are the risks?" Dr. Tisoni's expression sobered. "It's not without danger. There could be complications for both Quinn and Aurora. But Charles, this might be our best chance to bring Quinn back." The weight of the decision pressed down on Charles. He spent days consulting with medical experts, agonizing over the potential consequences. In the end, he gave his consent, clinging to the hope of reuniting his family. The day of the procedure arrived. Charles paced the waiting room, every minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, after several tense hours, Dr. Tisoni emerged, her face cautiously optimistic. "There's increased brain activity," she reported. "It's a good sign, but we need to monitor her closely." Over the next few weeks, Quinn's condition gradually improved. Charles spent every available moment by her side, talking to her, holding her hand, willing her to wake up. Aurora and the other children visited too, their presence filling the sterile hospital room with life and hope. Then on a quiet afternoon, as Charles sat reading reports by Quinn's bedside, he felt a slight pressure on his hand. He looked up to see Quinn's eyes flutter open, confusion and recognition warring in her gaze. "Charles?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Charles's heart soared as he squeezed her hand gently. "Welcome back," he said softly, tears of joy streaming down his face. "We've been waiting for you." "You!" His voice broke with emotion as he gently stroked her face, feeling the warmth returning to her skin. Quinn's eyes darted around the room, taking in her surroundings. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 6 months, Charles replied softly. "But you're back now. That's all that matters." As Quinn processed this information, her gaze fell on the small figure in the incubator beside her bed. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Is that—" Charles nodded, carefully lifting Aurora from the incubator and bringing her to Quinn's side. "This is our daughter, Aurora." Quinn's eyes filled with tears as she reached out to touch her daughter's tiny hand. Aurora's skin shimmered with a soft bioluminescence, a perfect blend of her parents' genetic heritage. Over the next few weeks, Quinn's recovery progressed steadily under Dr. Tisoni's care. However, it soon became apparent that the long coma had left her with some physical limitations. Simple tasks that she once took for granted now required concentrated effort. Charles watched with a mixture of concern and admiration as Quinn struggled to hold a cup, steady or take more than a few steps without assistance. Her perseverance was evident, but frustration often clouded her features. One evening, as Charles helped Quinn settle into bed, she let out a heavy sigh. "I feel like a stranger in my own body," she admitted, her voice tinged with sadness. Charles sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "We'll get through this together," he assured her. "Dr. Tisoni has developed a specialized therapy program for you. It'll help you regain your strength and mobility." Quinn nodded, grateful for his support but still apprehensive. "And what about us?" she asked hesitantly. "Our relationship, I'm not the same person I was before." Charles leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers. "We'll figure it out," he said softly. "One step at a time." The following day, they met with Dr. Tisoni to discuss Quinn's therapy plan. The doctor's office was filled with holographic displays of Quinn's neural scans and physical assessments. "The program I've designed combines physical therapy with neurofeedback techniques," Dr. Tisoni explained, gesturing to the displays. "It's tailored specifically to your hybrid physiology, Quinn." As she outlined the details of the therapy, Dr. Tisoni's expression softened. I also want to address the intimate aspects of your recovery, she said gently. Physical intimacy is an important part of rehabilitation and can significantly aid in your emotional recovery as well. Charles and Quinn exchanged glances, a mix of hope and uncertainty in their eyes. I've included exercises and techniques in your program to help you reconnect physically, Dr. Tisoni continued. They're designed to accommodate your current limitations while allowing you to explore and rediscover each other. Over the next few weeks, Charles and Quinn diligently followed Dr. Tisoni's program. The therapy sessions were challenging, often leaving Quinn exhausted, but with each passing day, her strength and coordination improved. The intimacy exercises proved to be both a challenge and a revelation. Initial attempts were awkward, with Quinn self-conscious about her physical limitations. But under Dr. Tisoni's guidance, they learned to communicate their needs and fears openly. One evening, as they lay together after a particularly successful session, Quinn traced patterns on Charles's chest with her fingertips. Her touch left faint, bioluminescent trails on his skin, a reminder of their unique connection. I never thought I'd feel this close to you again, Quinn murmured, her voice filled with wonder. Charles pulled her closer, marveling at how their bodies fit together despite the changes they'd both undergone. We're rediscovering each other, he said softly, and I fall in love with you more each day. As Quinn's recovery progressed, their attention turned increasingly to Aurora's rapid development. At just 6 months old, she was already displaying abilities far beyond her age, baffling both human and Suliban experts. One afternoon, as they watched Aurora manipulate a complex holographic puzzle designed for much older children, Dr. Zaravec shook her head in amazement. Her cognitive abilities are off the charts, the xenobiologist remarked. And her fine motor skills? It's as if her nervous system is evolving at an accelerated rate. Charles and Quinn exchanged worried glances. Is she healthy? Quinn asked, her voice tinged with concern. Dr. Vex nodded reassuringly. Perfectly healthy, just extraordinary. Her hybrid physiology seems to have unlocked potential we've never seen before. News of Aurora's unique abilities spread quickly through the scientific community. Soon, the family's communication channels were flooded with messages from research institutions across the galaxy, all eager to study Aurora's development. As Charles sorted through the latest batch of requests one evening, Quinn joined him, Aurora cradled in her arms. The baby's skin pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow, reflecting her contentment. What are we going to do? Quinn asked, her voice low to avoid waking Aurora. We can't keep her hidden away, but I'm worried about exposing her to so much scrutiny. Charles ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that had become more frequent as the pressure mounted. I don't know, he admitted, but we need to make a decision soon. The colony administration has been hinting at some kind of proposal. As if on cue, their AI assistant, Max, chimed in. Charles, Quinn, I've just received a priority message from Governor Linden. She's requesting a meeting with you both tomorrow morning to discuss a matter of utmost importance. Charles and Quinn looked at each other, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension in their eyes. Whatever the governor had in mind, they knew it would likely shape not only Aurora's future, but potentially the future of human-alien relations throughout the galaxy. As they prepared for bed that night, the weight of their impending decision hung heavy in the air. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril. But as Charles watched Quinn gently place Aurora in her crib, her bioluminescence creating a soft, comforting glow, he felt a surge of grit. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family. Family. The meeting with Governor Linden proved to be a turning point. As Charles and Quinn entered her office, they found not just the governor, but also Dr. Tisoni and several other key colony officials waiting for them. Thank you for coming, Governor Linden began, her tone serious but tinged with excitement. We have a proposition for you both, one that could change the future of our colony and potentially the galaxy. Over the next hour, the governor laid out a comprehensive plan for a hybrid research center, with Charles and Quinn at its helm. The facility would serve as a hub for studying and nurturing hybrid children like Aurora, while also advancing interspecies, understanding, and cooperation. Charles and Quinn listened intently, their hands clasped tightly together. As the presentation concluded, they exchanged a long look, years of shared experiences and unspoken communication passing between them. "We'll need time to discuss this," Charles said, turning back to the governor. Governor Linden nodded. "Of course, take the time you need, but please understand the urgency of the situation. The galaxy is watching us, and we have an opportunity to lead the way in this new frontier of interspecies relations." That evening, Charles and Quinn sat on their balcony, Aurora sleeping peacefully in her crib nearby. The bioluminescent flora of New Terra cast a soft glow over the landscape, reminding them of the beauty that could arise from the blending of different worlds. "What do you think?" Charles asked softly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Quinn was quiet for a moment, her skin pulsing gently with thought. "I think it's our best chance to protect Aurora and children like her," she said finally. "But it's a huge responsibility. Are we ready for this?" Charles took her hand, his fingers tracing the now familiar patterns of her bioluminescence. "I don't know if we're ready," he admitted, "but I do know that together we can face anything." After several days of intense discussion and soul-searching, they made their decision. The following week, Charles and Quinn stood before the colony's leadership council to accept the offer. "We're honored to take on this role," Charles announced, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "We believe this research center can be a beacon of hope and progress for hybrid families across the galaxy." Quinn stepped forward, Aurora cradled in her arms. "Our daughter represents the future, a future where the boundaries between species blur and new possibilities emerge. We're committed to ensuring that she, and all children like her, have the chance to thrive and reach their full potential." The announcement sent ripples throughout the colony and beyond. Within days, New Terra's communication channels were flooded with messages from across the galaxy. Families with hybrid children, scientists eager to contribute to the research, and diplomats seeking to establish ties all reached out to the fledgling center. Charles and Quinn threw themselves into the work of establishing the facility. They spent long hours with Dr. Tassoni, developing a curriculum that would address the unique needs of hybrid children while advancing scientific understanding of interspecies genetics. As construction began on the center's physical campus, the first wave of new arrivals reached New Terra. Charles watched from the spaceport observation deck as a ship touched down, carrying a group of families from 5 different species. Among them was a human mother cradling a child with distinct Andorian antennae. As she stepped off the ship, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and apprehension, Charles was struck by how familiar her expression was. It mirrored his own feelings from just months ago when Aurora was born. He approached the woman, extending his hand in greeting. "Welcome to New Terra," he said warmly. "I'm Charles Tanner. My wife Quinn and I look forward to working with you and your family." The woman's face lit up with recognition. "Mr. Tanner, we've heard so much about you and your work. I'm Elena Vasquez, and this is my daughter, Lyra." She gently stroked her child's blue-tinged cheek. "We've come so far to be here. Is it true that there are others like her?" Charles nodded, gesturing towards the colony beyond the spaceport. "There are, and there will be more. You're not alone anymore, Elena. Come, let me show you to your new home." As Charles led Elena and Lyra to their assigned quarters, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges ahead were daunting, but the potential for positive change was immense. With each new arrival, the dream of a truly integrated multi-species society grew closer to reality. Back at their residence, Quinn was busy coordinating with Dr. Vex on the latest round of tests for Aurora. The child, now 7 months old, was developing at an astonishing rate. Today, they were assessing her ability to manipulate light waves, a skill that had manifested unexpectedly during a recent playdate with other hybrid children. "Remarkable," Dr. Vex murmured, as Aurora created a small, shimmering hologram above her tiny palm. "Her control is improving rapidly. At this rate, we may need to accelerate our research timeline." Quinn nodded, a mix of pride and concern evident in her expression. "We need to ensure we're staying ahead of her development. The last thing we want is for her to face challenges we're not prepared for." As if sensing her mother's unease, Aurora turned her gaze to Quinn. The hologram in her hands shifted, forming a miniature replica of Quinn's face, complete with softly glowing skin. Quinn's breath caught in her throat at the display of affection and comprehension from her infant daughter. Later that evening, as Charles and Quinn prepared for bed, they discussed the day's events. Charles recounted the arrival of Elena and Lyra, while Quinn shared Aurora's latest achievements. "It's all happening so fast," Quinn said, leaning into Charles' embrace. "Sometimes I wonder if we're doing the right thing, exposing Aurora to all of this scrutiny and responsibility." Charles tightened his arms around her, his chin resting on top of her head. "I know," he said softly, "but look at what we've already accomplished. Families who once felt isolated and afraid now have a place where they belong. And Aurora, she's thriving, Quinn. She's growing into her abilities, surrounded by love and support." Quinn nodded, her bioluminescence pulsing in sync with Charles's heartbeat. "You're right," she said, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "We're building something important here, something that could change everything." As they settled into bed, the soft glow of Quinn's skin mingling with the cosmic radiation patterns on Charles's, they both felt a sense of anticipation for the future they were creating. The Hybrid Research Center was more than just a scientific endeavor. It was the beginning of a new era of understanding and cooperation between species. Outside their window, the night sky of New Terra shimmered with stars, each one potentially home to civilizations that might one day be part of this grand experiment. As Charles drifted off to sleep, he imagined a future where the boundaries between species were mere footnotes in history and where children like Aurora could grow up without fear or prejudice. The journey ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles both expected and unforeseen. But as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the sleeping forms of Charles and Quinn, it carried with it the promise of a new day, and with it, new possibilities for their family and for the entire galaxy.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.